Here with another episode of Entrepreneur TV, and in this episode we're going to talk about how to make money and how money is made. And by the way, a warning before we get into this, we're going to be talking about hundreds of thousands, billions, trillions, and you might be thinking, I can't do that, or that's not relevant to me, or how do I use this information? But watch through to the end because I'm going to show you by the time we finish this video exactly what you can do with this information and how you can profit from it. So here's 3 examples from this month of making money. And I'm going to call this magic money because it's the kind of money that can get printed out of thin air. The first is a tragic story of 20-year-old Alexander Kearns. Alexander committed suicide on railway tracks after thinking he'd lost $730,000. So here's an article. As you can see here, it says US youth 20 commit suicide after thinking he lost $1 million trading options on Robinhood. As you see here, he committed suicide after thinking he blew up his entire future. And in his final note, seen by his parents as reported by Forbes, Kearns wrote, "How is a 20-year-old with no income able to get assigned almost $1 million worth of leverage?" And you can see here not only the Twitter post of his note, but also it actually goes on to say, in a screenshot of Kearns' Robinhood account, the app showed that he had a negative cash balance of $730,000, but the number did not represent uncollateralized indebtedness, but was merely his temporary balance underlying his assigned options actually settled in his account. Okay, in layman's terms, what is actually being said there is that he was right in the middle of a trade where it was an options trade. Half of it had settled, which then showed this massive $730,000 negative, which wasn't his cash. It was just basically one balance on the option. And then when the other side would then settle, then it wouldn't be anything like that amount that he lost. In fact, he lost a very small amount, and actually he was up on his balance for that week. And the article actually ends with a quote from his cousin-in-law, Bill Brewster, who says, when he saw that 730,000 numbers are negative, he thought he had blown up his entire future. I mean, this is a kid that when he was younger was so conscious about savings. So the whole thing was a misunderstanding, but it was all about digits that had just been magicked up on a screen. But by not understanding what those numbers meant, it actually drove a young man to his death. Here, let me give you a second story. This is a story about Wirecard CEO Markus Braun. So here's an article about Markus, which says Wirecard's former CEO Markus Braun arrested after $2 billion scandal explodes. Markus Braun, the Austrian tech entrepreneur who built Wirecard into one of Germany's biggest companies, has been arrested after a $2.1 billion hole exploded in its accounts. And if you haven't heard who Wirecard is, Wirecard became a $24 billion unicorn in Germany, and it replaced Commerzbank, which was the second largest bank in Germany at the time, as one of the top 30 companies in the country. Since its peak, when its shares were worth 191 euros, it's dropped all the way down to 2 euros 67 cents. That's basically a 99% drop in its value. And what happened here was there was $2 billion, which was on the balance sheet as cash for Wirecard, which turned out to be fake. It was meant to be in trust accounts in Philippines, but when the auditors double checked to make sure that the money was actually there, it turned out it never existed in the first place. This second story, just like the first story, is about magic money that just gets printed out on the screen. Magic money just made up from a few keystrokes. But there's 2 big differences between Robinhood and Wirecard. The first is the number of zeros, right? We're going from now hundreds of thousands up to billions of dollars. The second is that the first story was an honest mistake which came from a bad design and ended up with a tragic outcome, while the second one was about a deliberate fraud, which is why the CEO was arrested and is now being charged. Okay, let me give you a third example. Here's a headline from Bloomberg: a $10 trillion Fed balance sheet is coming. As it says here, the Federal Reserve's balance sheet is exploding, growing by about $3 trillion since mid-March and now totaling more than $7 trillion. It could conceivably exceed $10 trillion by year end. This would be double the peak that the Fed's balance sheet reached after the 2008-2009 financial crisis. So what's going on here? Is the Fed actually physically printing money? No, they're doing exactly the same as in the first 2 stories, where just with a few keystrokes, they're magicking up now trillions of dollars. Believe it or not, this is how money is made. It starts with the Fed typing out trillions of dollars and then selling these to bondholders. The bondholders buy this debt and then deposit this in bank accounts. The banks then add those digits into its balance sheet, and the asset then shows up as money, and the liability shows up as debt paid back to those bondholders. And then the bank is then able to reloan more money out to other people as a result of its increased balance sheet, and this is part of fractional banking. So fractional banking is how money makes more money, and it's where a bank is able to have some money on its balance sheet, loan out even more money than it has, and normally that has been 10 times the amount that's on the balance sheet. Or another way to say that is that their reserve requirement has had to be 10%, and this has been mandated by the Fed for many years. However, back in March at the beginning of this coronavirus crisis, all that changed. As you'll see in this article, it says the Fed fires the big one. And as well as the Fed doing some of the things you already would have heard of, like printing money or bringing interest rates down to zero, they also brought the reserve requirements cut right down to zero. This is the bomb. What that actually means is that banks don't even have to hold any reserves in order for them to start loaning money out to others, which is why we're seeing this massive growth in the amount of money that's out there right now. Now, just to be clear, all these three stories are exactly the same. They're about how money is just printed from nothing. In each of these cases, no value is created, no product is sold, money just shows up as digits on a screen. In the case of Robinhood and Alexander Kearns, the number was less than $1 million, and it was a temporary balance that was calculated by an app. In the second case of Wirecard and Markus Braun, it was $2 billion, and it was a deliberate and illegal act to mislead investors. And that's because companies aren't allowed to just magic up money. And the third case is the United States Federal Reserve, and the number is over $3 trillion. But as they control the money system, that was completely legal. No one died, no one got arrested. But the trouble is, when you turn that virtual money into real money, it still at some point needs to get paid back. So what do we learn from all of this? The first is that there is no such thing as making money. Only the government can legally make it, unless of course you create your own cryptocurrency or private currency. The second is that they're clearly making a lot of it. We're living on a mountain of magic money. To put it in perspective, here is a graphic from MarketWatch. The amount of actual currency is $1.7 trillion. If you add current accounts, that grows to 37 trillion, which is 95% digital, and that's called narrow money. If you add broad money, which is all mutual funds, money market securities, and saving deposits, you're now up to 90 trillion. And if you add derivatives, cryptocurrencies, and other investments, we're now up to 1.2 quadrillion. How much is a quadrillion? A quadrillion is 1,000 trillion, of which real money is just 1% of a percent. The rest of it is magic money, all just on a screen. And by the way, if you're looking for a breakdown of the whole money supply, and with all this information, that takes me on to the third point, which is that if you're an entrepreneur or an investor, the question isn't how do I make money? Because you can't and you don't need to. There's already so much of it. So what is the right question to ask? The question to ask is, how do you attract it? And the answer is to create value, because money is always looking for a home. Everyone who has it is either looking to exchange it for value or invest it in a place which is going to give it a high return. Every day there's trillions of dollars which is changing hands, and it's always moving towards those hands which are actually providing higher value. So what are the three ways to create value? Value can be what someone wants or needs. Value can be what keeps money safe or keeps it growing. And value almost always is about solving a problem better than others are solving it right now. And by the way, in this crisis, we're actually seeing a massive destruction of value, but we're also seeing more problems than ever. So change your focus from trying to make money to attracting money. Change your focus from chasing value to creating value. And change your focus from selling products to solving problems. As Albert Einstein says, do not try to become a person of success, try to become a person of value. As we continue to move through this crisis, I'm going to keep on giving updates on the latest stories that are happening and what you can do with this information. If you'd like to follow along and you haven't yet subscribed, then please do subscribe. If you've liked this video, please give it a like. And I'd love to hear your views down below, so do post a comment and I'll make sure I look at all of them. And if you're wondering what the consequence of all this printing of money by the Fed is going to lead us to, do have a watch of this video, which I did on Ray Dalio, and the upcoming dollar crash. And while we continue on this crazy journey of money being printed all around the world, I want to dedicate this video to Alexander Kearns. May he rest in peace. I do hope that you have got some learning from this video, that you've enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.